Unlabeled Leadership is a volunteer service. We appreciate our guests for their stewardship and remarkable stories. We also appreciate listeners like you who back the show with star reviews and contributions.
Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 151. Baiba Žiga encourages growth and systemic change. Here's a shout out to listeners in Central and Western districts of Hong Kong, Fiji, Hungary, Iran, Valencia, Spain, and Basel, Switzerland. I do have some news to share. Productivity Press is going to publish the second edition of 9 Practices of 21st Century Leadership this Friday, July 22nd. Check it out. With that, let's get started. Baiba is a brilliant DEI and workplace culture consultant. She's helped thousands of professionals through her speaking events, leadership coaching, and with something new called COPA, founded this year, which is a DEI community for professionals in DEI and workplace culture. It's where you can make meaningful connections, grow your capabilities, and even co-create knowledge. Baiba is someone you should get to know. Part 1. Reevaluate how you work. In my 9 Practices book, I talk about 7 leadership principles. One of those principles is encourage growth. When working with others, you're unlikely to know when something you say at the right time, in the right circumstances, has a profound effect on how someone thinks about their lives and triggers immense growth. Baiba shares a story in which someone says something that does have a profound effect on her life and how she views work. Here's Baiba to explain.
It made me reflect on some of the most profound conversations and moments in my life, and which really made a lasting impact. And one that jumped on me or sort of came to me straight away was a conversation with my, at that time, mentor. And at that time, I was working for a large FTSE 100 New York Stock Exchange size organization. So it's a large organization. He was my mentor within this organization. During one of our mentoring sessions, he said to me, and I can't remember what that was about, but it just resonated. And he said to me, he goes, there isn't a brownie jar where you can keep on putting coins in every time you do something good and then claim them when it's the right time. Like, when you apply for a promotion or you want to get a better job or a better project, no one owes you anything. And that was sort of for the context of the corporate environment. But that really, really resonated. Because up to that point, I felt that I had been playing safe and always trying to be the good girl and doing everything right and collecting those brownie points so that I can redeem them one day when it comes to, a promotion or anything like that. And that was a real sort of eye-opener. What it made me do, it made me reassess and reevaluate my relationship with my work, with my colleagues, my team, and myself, most importantly. I realized that I put too much power and faith into other people, in systems and in processes. That conversation was what pushed me to make the first steps towards reclaiming my power. Alongside this journey, a friend of mine, Sally Musa, she's a TV and radio presenter in Dubai. So she regularly gets to interview influential authors and thought leaders. Whenever she does, and when she comes across like a truly great piece, she usually messages me with, you must read this. She had this interview with a writer and poet, Neva Zabian, about her latest book called Welcome Home. And God, that book made me have a hard and deep look at myself. But again, one of the key messages that I drove home was around reclaiming my power, my truth, my authenticity, leaning into vulnerability, which was always uncomfortable and wasn't sort of that I regularly and openly did. All of those are important ingredients of leadership, but don't just happen. We have to consciously evolve them. That means attending ourselves first and foremost. And that answer maybe might seem like a bit of a cop-out, but I truly believe that we need to completely redefine the notion leader and create the shift from it being someone who, quote unquote, does things to someone who is and embodies leadership. When you go on Amazon and you search book titles on leadership, probably the first, 5 to 10 titles that will come up will be the 5 things great leaders do, the 10 things highly effective leaders do, the 7 things an effective leader, right? It's all about doing. We have developed this notion that to be a successful leader, we need to, wake up at 5 a.m., down a Red Bull, run a marathon, read a book, and all, that being done before 6 a.m. in the morning, right? So we have developed this unrealistic expectation and standard to what a leader is. But actually, what that does, it develops this sense of perfectionism that we all strive for. How many times, we've said, oh, I did that, or I expect that standard of myself and my team because I'm a perfectionism. But what is perfectionism? Perfectionism is something that is born out of shame. Where shame and perfectionism lives, it means that there is no empathy and accountability. And those are, again, the key ingredients of a leader. To me, leadership begins with attending and assessing ourselves and with self-leadership. Because again, in my work, within diversity, equity, and inclusion and workplace cultures, a lot of senior members of the teams and the HR leaders approach me about helping them with leading diversity. But, how can we lead diversity if we are not good people leaders? Because we haven't invested enough in ourselves and haven't given, the tools and space to invest in ourselves to become good self-leaders first and foremost. That conversation with my mentor at that time really made me have a, hard look at myself and just look at how much of my power I have given away to false notions, to systematic notions, cultural notions that don't serve me, don't align with my values, and ultimately are harmful in the long run.
If I was in an organization where they have a workforce reduction and immediately eliminate so many people, or they'll just drop someone at the drop of a hat, but you're expected if you leave to give 2 weeks notice or whatever. If I was in that type of an organization, there's a lot to be said about not only empowering yourself and reclaiming your power and your vulnerability, but when the corporation or organization is not going to empower the people, being in such an organization, it is so crucial to be able to empower the people around you and be mentors to them and give them an opportunity for their own self-discovery and realizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Because what a lot of organizations lack is courage to have brave and courageous conversations ultimately. That stems out of vulnerability, of being connected to vulnerability. And this is the thing, I have worked with organizations where courage is one of their core values written, in beautiful fonts all over their walls. But the problem is with, again, those values is that organizations don't operationalize them. And I love that word. And that comes from Brené Brown's work, operationalizing values, is that we put those values on the walls, courage and or whatever it might be. But they actually mean something. And then the question is, how does the organization or the leaders operationalize those values through underpinning or unpacking what that value means in terms of a behavior? How do we display courage? What does courage mean in every sort of day-to-day work and in my line of work? What skills do I need to be able to unpin that behavior that then unpins that value? And we don't do that. Then, those skills that are needed to display those values then should be tied into or should unpin the L&D process, learning and development process within the organization. But we don't see that. We just don't see that enough.
You're absolutely right. I think it came out very clear last year and the year, particularly in 2020, May 25th, the death of George Floyd. Some corporations came out and they were expressing a stance, which at the time was very encouraging. They showed courage They're able to say, this is not right. We need to change. But then 6 months later, their voice became silent.
Mm-hmm.
Where's that operationalizing the concept of courage at the senior executive level? I've heard a lot of frustration when that doesn't happen.
Mm. And what's lacking there is consistency and accountability. And again, going back to that accountability piece, because again, where perfectionism lives, because, perfectionism is a performance, it's something unattainable, where shame lives, there is no empathy or accountability. So again, those acts of solidarity are, we're performative. And we saw that across the world. Putting out a marketing or a PR messaging requires a level of courage, but that's not the work. The work is in consistency, in then keeping ourselves and yourselves accountable to that courage or to that messaging throughout the year, every single day for so the rest of your lives, because it's not just something that you do once and then you walk away from it. That's not allyship. That's not courage. It's just performatism. It's just performance.
Part 2, Finland, Systemic Thinking, and Asking Powerful Questions. Reflection is a critical part of growth. In this story, Baiba talks about an experience that she had in Finland that became a powerful learning experience. This led to some comments about DEI, systemic thinking, emotional intelligence, and vulnerability. Again, here's Baiba.
I have witnessed a lot of acts of leadership from my friends, from my family, from colleagues, peers. But I think the most sort of profound acts of leadership are the ones that I have showed myself and to myself, and how I've showed up as a leader in my own life, first and foremost. Some might feel that this is like a cop-out because they want big names. What big names are they? What are the leaders? How can we ever show up as true leaders for others if we haven't spent the time investing and exploring ourselves?
Yeah.
Because I don't think there is one without the other. There are several points in my life where now, as I sit here, I can say I'm very proud and inspired by my own leadership. In the last 2.5 years alone, I can come up, with several examples, from starting my own business in the middle of pandemic to reinventing and pivoting my offering a number of times, to signing up to a nomadic lifestyle and running my business from some of the most remote locations in the world. I think the real highlight, and it's ironic that I call it a highlight today, as it actually was one of the darkest periods of my life. It was February 2022 when I was hit hard with burnout, and a bunch of health conditions and health problems came up there.
This is 2 months ago.
February 2021.
Oh, 22. Okay.
Yeah, so last year, just a little bit more than a year ago, this was, yeah. Still fairly recently. And at that time, we were living in Finland, or residing in Finland, not just Finland as we know it, but it was near the Arctic Circle of Finland, where you get little to no daylight during the winter months. And this is February. It was one of the darkest periods of my life, literally, and also figuratively speaking. Now, looking back at it, the way I leaned into that pain, the discomfort of the situation, the lack of control I had of my own body, because the body was reacting to burnout in ways that I couldn't control. The way I stopped certain projects and attended myself fully without feeling guilty was very, very impressive. It was painful at the time, and there definitely was a level of guilt at the time, but actually now looking back at it, the reason why I'm here and I can say, I am on the other side of the burnout is because I took the time out to attend myself and invest in myself. This act of me pouring into myself, giving myself the time to heal and grace during this recovery period is what has made me recover, as I said, in a relatively short period of time. That being able to stop, assess the risks, label the emotions, ask powerful questions, and make courageous decisions is what leadership is. And if that is how I can show up in my life, then the chances are that I will be able to show up that for my teams, my communities, the businesses that I serve. And so, yeah, and I use this as example to, again, just go back to, what I said earlier, that we just need to completely redefine the notion of leader and leadership, because often, again, it's about, what others do and these, big, courageous acts. And yes, absolutely, that is leadership. But again, we can't overlook the acts of leadership and how we have showed up for ourselves. Because when, again, from, my work in sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion, a lot of the conversation is focused around systems and systemic inequities and exclusion and injustices. And when we talk about dismantling these systems and changing these systems, it can become overwhelming and you don't really know where to start, because this battle and these systems are much bigger than yourself. Whenever I work with leaders as part of leadership coaching, is to first and foremost look at ourselves, because we are, once again, the product and the manifestation of those systems. And we need to first and foremost dismantle our own toxic belief and value systems so that we can make those systems better.
There are two things that really stood out in what you were talking about, and that is how crucial reflection and learning is. Being able to take that step back almost at a metacognitive level, where you're looking at the situation as an observer to identify those patterns. You used the words earlier, labeling of emotions.
Right.
It's recognizing what is going on. And reflection is so important to overcoming or understanding what's going on and helping you find the direction that you need to go or your next steps.
100%. And talking about that self-reflection and, again, sort of the leadership toolkit, we talk a lot around the leaders need to be emotionally intelligent and they need to have high level of self-awareness. And we talk about empathy. Recently, we've started talking about vulnerability, but then we never really unpack this EQ or emotional intelligence in more detail to, again, make it operational, for one of the better words, to make it resonate with people. If I say you need to be more empathetic, how can, again, we expect someone who is perfectionist, for instance, be empathetic if perfectionism and empathy do not live in the same place? When we talk about emotional intelligence and self-awareness, we do need to start with things like with emotional intelligence, with emotional vocabulary. Brene Brown, and I love her work, and she and her team did the research or surveyed rather, I think it was 17,000 leaders to identify how many emotions can they name and label. The average number of emotions that leaders could name were 3. There are nearly 30 emotions out there, and even more when it comes to emotions and experiences or feelings and experiences. They could name 3: sad, happy, and angry. Right. These are the people who we, quote unquote, call leaders. How can we talk about self-awareness and emotional intelligence and leadership if these people can't even properly name and label their emotions? Because empathy and compassion is not the same thing. Because shame and guilt is not the same thing. It is important to have that emotional vocabulary and intelligence. And that is completely life-changing. It's life-changing for us as individuals and leaders. And it's also life-changing for how we interact with our teams, the communities that we serve, with our children and with our partners. Another one, asking questions, and not just asking questions, but asking powerful questions. The conversation around powerful questions is one that I had a few weeks ago on a LinkedIn Live session with 2 amazing guests. We specifically talked about the power of asking powerful questions. And again, the ability to ask the right questions in the right time and showing the curiosity rather than, again, leading from the space of knowing it all and always having answers for everything and always being there to fix everything, but actually being the teacher and student all at the same time and leaning into the curiosity through powerful questions. That is, again, not something that we are natural and naturally good at, but thankfully it is a skill that we can develop. Intercultural intelligence, another piece of that leadership toolkit and puzzle. So now we are starting to make this emotional intelligence and self-awareness more operational. What are the aspects of it? What are the ways of how we can develop and evolve it?
You brought up the term intercultural intelligence, and this is something that it makes sense, but I haven't heard those words together. Could you explain what that means?
I did a LinkedIn Live session and I had two amazing guests. I had Lisa Patti from New York and I had Lisa Pienkorka from Finland talking about this. And both of them are communications and interculture intelligence professionals and practitioners. We look at communications across different cultures and social groups. It describes the many communication processes and the related issues among those groups of individuals from varied backgrounds. And this isn't just about different languages, but also the different value and belief systems that come with different cultural backgrounds. We often think that intercultural communications take place in an intercultural environment. So the person opposite to us must come from a different country or be from a different national, ethnic, religious background to us. However, such communications or intercultural communications take place within our own families due to different generations, due to different gender differences, due to different worldviews ultimately. There are many businesses that call themselves, we are a global, international, intercultural business, but the failure to understand the cultural differences can bear very serious consequences.
One of the things that you brought up from that LinkedIn Live was the ability to ask powerful questions.
Mm-hmm.
When you ask powerful questions, what comes to mind is the consulting work that I've done in helping people in HR talk to business owners or heads of business units. And that's helping them see the systems they work in that they may not realize what's going on. And those powerful questions is a way of uncoupling or lifting the hood of what is going on in the organization and see things from a completely different perspective. I think that applies to DEI. It applies to just working with people and communications and uncovering some of the cultural rituals that have developed within the organization without even realizing what's going on. Those powerful questions are a way of exposing some of the systemic processes that may not have been conscious.
Right. And how many organizations right now are striving for belonging or at least talking about it? That being, one of the things that they want to develop within their organizations. Yet one of the key aspects of belonging is psychological safety.
Yeah.
One of the key foundations of psychological safety within our organizations and empathetic and compassionate leadership in our organizations is our communication. More specifically, the way we create meaningful connections with one another. One of the most basic yet profound steps towards it is examining our conversations. One part of that is examining the questions that we ask. Another interesting point around this and asking questions, and to your point, how powerful and right questions can open up a lot of discussions and insights about what does the organization where we are actually look like, and who do we serve, who do we don't serve, who is this environment made for and created for, and who it definitely isn't created for, and who it systemically and intentionally or unintentionally excludes. Another aspect of that is that we as leaders can't go there, i.e. go into those conversations, and we can't lead our people deep into those conversations and that consciousness if we haven't done that work ourselves. And I saw this somewhere, some coach was talking about it somewhere on social media, and it just resonated with me, and I cannot remember where that was or who was saying that, but it was something along the lines that we can't take anyone deeper than we've been ourselves.
Okay.
And this again comes back to the fact that we need to do that self-examination and invest that work in ourselves before we can start leading others, let alone leading diversity.
Part 3, the best leadership investment you can make. Near the end of episodes, I ask guests to share their insight and advice that you could begin doing almost immediately. Baiba has some advice for you on how you can improve your leadership. Here's Baiba.
Some of the things that you can practically do would be take a moment to ask yourself, what does being a leader means to you? What does being a leader looks like to you? How has someone showed up for you that inspired you and you look up to as aspect of leadership? Another thing you can do is write down the top 5 leaders you look up to. What is it about them that makes you see them as leaders? And then look at this list once again. Who are these people? Do they all look the same? Do they all come from similar backgrounds? Is there an opportunity to rethink this list and perhaps even rethink the way we look at leadership? And is there an opportunity for us to expand that notion and also our growth zone? So that would be number one thing that I would say in how to start examining our value and belief system.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, please.
Your challenge to people is think about 5 people that you look up to because of their leadership.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm gathering is that it could be famous people. It could be people within your own business. It could be a relative. Here's why I would love to add to that. No matter who provided their life, who they are, find them and talk to them. I see you as a person who leads. Ask them, what do you think it is about you that people see in you as someone who leads? To add one more layer to it that I did not think of until you were talking is take that list of 5 people to someone and say, here's 5 people I admire for their leadership. What do you see that they have in common that maybe I don't see? What do you think that says about me?
I love that point, especially if you have picked people that are actually reachable. If you have picked classic Tony Robbins, I think his name's.
Yeah, Tony Robbins.
And Gary, right, and like Gary V's and so on, it might be a little bit difficult to do that. But if you do have a list of Tony Robbins, Gary V, and similar white, very successful men, there might be, an opportunity to expand that list ever so slightly and tap into different aspects of leadership. And you might just discover something about yourself. That's a nice way of auditing that. Another thing I would say is best investment you can make is investment in yourself. So if you do have an opportunity, then I would say, get a leadership coach to support you with this journey. Someone who will help you with seeing and considering different perspectives and worldviews and just help you expand your growth zone. And the last thing I would say is learn to enjoy the journey, learn to enjoy the growth, the process. It is uncomfortable at times, it's tough, it's unpredictable, but learn to lean into it as that process of expanding your comfort zone will be your biggest teacher.
My thanks to Baiba Žiga. If you'd like to learn more about Baiba, go to the show notes. And if you have a question or comment, go to unlabelleadership.com, click the message icon, and you can leave a voicemail message for up to 1 minute. I'd like to thank those who donate to the show. Your contributions makes a difference because this is an all-volunteer service. Thank you for listening. This is Gary DePaul. Until next time, lead on.